Yeah. Hello, B3 people out there. Good to see you. I hope you can see me and understand me because, sometimes the whole thing with internet technology is almost like a seance, like, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Are you there? Are you there? But it's good to have Steam here on the tech side and everything should be working. So my name is Johannes Grenzfurtner. I'm an artist and a filmmaker based in Vienna, Austria. And I've been doing art for like almost 30 years now. I am the founder of an art and tech collective called Monochrome, have been doing lots of different shenanigans and films and movies and computer games and festivals and all kinds of stuff. But one thing that is hopefully helpful with our special guest tonight, Ben Grosser, is that I am kind of like a very early digital native. So I think I've been in online communication since probably 1987 or something like that. So very early on in the BBS days. And it's wonderful to have Ben here because he's an artist and composer, but focusing on the cultural and social and political implications of software. So I've seen a lot of software and I've seen a lot of online communications in my life. So I want to dig deep into the nerdiness of all of that stuff and would like to ask you the first question because it's directly related to the B3 is that you made a film called Order of Magnitude. It's a supercut of Mark Zuckerberg. Could you tell us a little bit about the piece? We cannot show it here right now, but it's in the short film program of the B3. But just for all the people to understand what's going on there, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, and happy to be here and happy to get to chat.
Yeah.
I have my own, the 80s is when my time on the network started in the BBS era as well. So we could talk about that at any point. Yeah, Order of Magnitude. It's a supercut made up of drawing from every recorded video appearance of Mark Zuckerberg, from his first one at age 19 in 2004 to the last one he gave in the year 2018. I made the film in the first half of 2019, so I took it up through the end of 2018. So it spans 15 years of his life, and I extracted from each of those videos, every time he spoke, one of three things: the word more, the word grow or growth or grew, its various forms, and every time he utters a metric. So 1 million, 2 billion, 100,000, and that's it. It comes in time order, and so it starts when he's age 19 and it ends when he's age 38. And when I started to work on this film, when I thought about it, I thought, oh, this will end up being a long supercut that probably longer than people will want to watch. It'll be maybe 5 minutes or 8 minutes long. As I started to work on it and really extract all the information and mine and find more videos, it got to be 10 minutes long. It got to be 15 minutes long. Eventually, the film, when I was all done, ended up at 47 minutes. So it's a 47-minute supercut of Mark Zuckerberg saying grow more 2 billion and other kind of minor variations of that. But for me, it's really an examination as an artist who focuses on the cultural effects of software. Usually my work takes the form of code that gets in between the user and the system as a way of letting everyday people kind of evaluate and understand their use of technology in different ways. But with this work, I really wanted to kind of go behind the scenes and think more deeply, as I know you have as well, about kind of who makes technology, where do they come from, how do they think, why do they do what they do, why do they make the decisions that they make. And so that's really what this work is about for me. It's about trying to kind of understand what I would call the growth ideology of Silicon Valley, the obsession with growth that has been happening for the last 15 years coming out of Silicon Valley.
Wonderful. I mean, for me, I would let's jump back to 1995 because there is that's the year for me that's kind of interesting because for the first time, from my perspective, I saw a leftist scholar, or two leftist scholars, Barbrook and Cameron, actually publishing a pamphlet called The Californian Ideology, where they're trying to kind of nail down what is going on in Silicon Valley. And they postulated that, for all the people who don't know it, that there is this strange convergence of hippiedom and hypercapitalism, and that created the mental landscape of Silicon Valley. And my question would be, do you think it still holds up? If you look back to 1995, to that specific piece of kind of like critique, or is it already completely outdated? What do you think?
I think it depends on what you think of as Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
I do try to not, as much as I do paint it with a broad brush, I try to remember that not everybody in the valley is the same,
Mm-hmm.
nor do they think the same. But certainly the dominant kind of presence of Silicon Valley in the world now is massive big tech corporations and Facebook, Google, et cetera. And it's hard to see much of what you're talking about there, I will say. There's such, the way that I think back to 1995 and being as someone on the internet in 1995 and the kind of the ideals that were kind of present in that moment of democracy and decentralization and these kinds of ideas. And of course, they were flawed, perhaps, to imagine we could create. I mean, they absolutely were flawed to imagine we could just create a new society absent of all of our ills in physical space. But once the market really got its hold on tech in, I don't know, early 2000s or .com, kind of boom, as that kind of grew, so much of I think what ended up happening is Silicon Valley drew a different kind of person. And maybe Mark is a good example of that. People who were really interested in some weird mix of, what can we do that's really kind of fascinating and interesting with the technology? And Mark certainly fits that. But also, how can we grow it to be the biggest, most dominating thing on the planet? And that's the other piece of it that I think complicates the picture. But I'd be interested to know what you think about that question.
Well, I mean, for me, so when I got online for the first time in 1987, it was the bulletin board system era. So there was no internet in that sense, because I guess with the opening of the internet in 1987, that kind of like when not like more people could use it, not only academic institutions and military institutions. So in the 1980s and early 1990s, like there was no kind of like really open internet. But when the internet got more accessible with the World Wide Web and all that stuff, I found it interesting from my perspective, because I was already in that time getting more and more political. It was also the time that Monochrome started, so I was part of this kind of like leftist online groups and all that stuff, and kind of like was interested in, so how could we shape that medium? So that medium is there, only a few people are on it, and how can we nudge it in the right direction? And what I felt was, and that's why I was so happy that someone would address that in 95 with the Californian ideology, because I tried to bring people from the left into the internet, because I thought, if we're not going into the internet right now, someone else will shape it. Mm-hmm. And many people on the left were super afraid of it. That was the time that people didn't want to have cell phones. When the cell phones came up in 98 and 99, people didn't want to have an email address, because there was this inbred angst, I guess, in the left of being controlled, of someone reading the data. And I think for many years, kind of like the ideological left kind of missed its part, so to speak. So many libertarian went online because they felt it's, like the Wild West and we can do whatever we want. And kind of like a certain form of people and a certain form of kind of like people with ideological beliefs went online and kind of did what they do. They just like nudged it in the right direction for their cause. And I still feel that something is lost because of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The thinking that you're doing there, there's a there's a way, and if it's, I don't know if it's possible for me to keep seeing Johannes while we talk. It's a little hard for me to chat when I can't see. Oh, he is there in the tiny,
I'm there. I'm the
tiny
tiny little.
square. Okay.
I'm the tiny.
It
I'm
seemed
like
like
it's like
here we are.
mini
Technology
Johannes, mini
always
me is
present. We're
there.
talking about technology. So it's like it's hard to talk to yourself. I mean, it's not hard at home in front of the mirror, but
Yeah,
there.
but
Thank you.
sometimes technology forces you to talk to yourself all the time.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think the libertarian, the way the part of the way I end up talking and thinking about this is that once the technology problems kind of grew in scale, as in the early days of the web, 1995, and a few years after that, everything was kind of thrown together in whatever way one could make possible. But as aspirations grew and scale started to become important, and the people that were drawn to Silicon Valley and the people that Silicon Valley drew were often coming from a lot of the same kind of computer science education backgrounds in the United States. And whereas I think of the early days of the internet as something populated by a weird eclectic mix of whomever found technology interesting as a thing to get into or to play with wherever they came from, artists and humanists and scientists and social scientists and whomever, I think the transition happened that was just increasingly more about kind of engineering. Mm-hmm. And the creation of these tools, of these systems, were less coming from that eclectic mix and coming more from a singular kind of focus. And as a result, or one outcome of that, I would say, is that you end up with tools. We can't. This is part of what I do in my work. Is software comes with ideologies embedded in it. Whoever creates a piece of software has a conception of who the user is, and they create software for that user or for those users. They often create software in a way that reflects how they think about the world. And as a result, their way of thinking then can kind of inflects itself on the people who use that software as well, and they start to think of themselves this way. And I think as it became more business focused around 2000 and on, as profit became the motive, as opposed to playing around with the technology and seeing what it can do in this weird new space that was kind of unusual and that a lot of people weren't even willing to go to, right? But once it transitioned away from that, as well, how are we going to make money on this? Then it really started to change what happened. And I think some of the things that your friends were seeing in the 90s that maybe steered them away, concerns about control and surveillance and those kinds of things, became activated. I mean, they were certainly there in 1995, right? But after 2004, and especially in the late aughts and now in the 2010 to 2020 era, the capacity for surveillance and control certainly became the dominating mechanism by which Silicon Valley makes its profit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, like seeing the big trends of the last couple of years, I think that trust is kind of like a very important concept in the digital age. You want to trust the system. You want to trust the connection. You don't want any middleman attacks or something like that. But at the same time, like the overall societal shift seems that no one is trusting anyone anymore. People don't trust the governments. People don't trust anything. People don't trust the media. At the same time, people demand trust in digital concepts. And then everything gets like askew. So like my question now for you would be, is there a way out of that conundrum? So how can we bring back the concept of trust? Maybe trust in software, trust in internet connections, trust in security. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a difficult. I mean, it's a great question, and it's one that I think my first reaction to is we're just so far down the road of everyday users of the internet really feeling like they don't know what they can trust or where to go anymore, or if they are trusting, then it's probably a false feeling of trust that, if they think what they're seeing is a good representation of the state of things, then they're probably mistaken, because we're so far down the road of algorithmic feeds now, where Facebook or Google or whomever it is decides what we see in response to going to the feed or entering a query into Google or whatever it is. It's Google's motto, right, was organizing the world's information or something along those lines. And it's gotten to the point where people presume, well, if Google doesn't show me something on the first page of hits, then it probably isn't there, or it probably didn't happen, or it's kind of like a general conception. If Google doesn't talk about it, if they don't know about it, it's not really there, it didn't happen. Often people think with Facebook that what they see is a good representation of what their friends are posting or what's going on, but it's really a very specific conception of how an algorithm can decide what's going to keep you most engaged. I think this is really the core issue from my perspective, is that the motivation of the big platforms is not to give you the best, most trustworthy information. That's not how they were built. They were built to keep your attention focused on them as much as possible for as many minutes a day as possible, and to input as much data as possible so that they can better target ads and make more money in those ways. So from my perspective, the best answer I have to your question is some major things would need to change, such as something like Facebook has become essential communications infrastructure for the world at this point. 3 billion plus people on it. I don't think we should have essential communications infrastructure in the hands of a single corporation for the entire world, and a single corporation run by majority by a single individual. That creates all kinds of incentives and limitations and vulnerabilities that people are never going to feel safe or trusting of a situation like that, or certainly shouldn't. So a first thing would be is we've got to decentralize essential infrastructure on the internet, and probably we need to get it into the hands of the public in some way or another. I mean, one way of doing that would be the government. Now, I'm in the United States right now. It's October or September, I guess, right now. 2020, we're headed for another election here, so I certainly don't have a trustworthy government here in the United States right now. Nor do I think government is a great answer to all questions, but it is at least a space where the public has some capacity to understand what's happening. And right now, it's a black box. We don't know what's happening inside these systems. They're owned by single individuals and companies. So it's got to somehow get out into the public. It could be open source. That would make a lot of sense. It could be decentralized or owned by the public, one or the other. Some kind of federated, kind of multinational thing. Honestly, those are probably the two biggest from my perspective. Somehow it's got to be owned by the public. Somehow it's got to be decentralized. And maybe the other one is that part of that, and there's been a lot of attempts and discussion of ways of doing this, but right now, everything you enter into these systems is then captured and held and stored by the company. And I think a different way of doing it that a lot of people talk about is you should be able to have a hold of your own data, that it should really be, whatever you enter should really be within something you control. And you could allow it to be viewed and participate in systems and platforms as you want. But you shouldn't have to ask Facebook for your data back. You should just have it in the first place, and then you could say they can access it. Things like that, I think, would maybe start to, if we really could build with something like what I'm talking about, then yeah, I think it could go a long way. But it would take a massive coordination and effort to make a shift like that. And there's been some attempts, and they usually fail because platforms have scale to their advantage. It's like, why are people on Facebook? Because people are on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly.
So hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So many people told me in the last 10 years, Facebook is just a fad, So like, it will be gone in 2 years. It will be gone in 2 years. No,
Yeah.
it's like 3 billion people are on Facebook. And I mean, you can say as much as you like about like, it's not cool to be on Facebook anymore, less and less. No, like they have a certain amount of power. And in the meantime, they have WhatsApp and they have Instagram and this and that. So it's not that like it's all like, it's a bunch of really popular tools and they are not going away and people use them. Yeah. I mean, if I go back to the like late 19th century or early 20th century, what is most interesting is that the early kind of like the workers' movement and the first social movements, they were really good in creating common spaces. You know, like libraries. Schools of some kind, all kinds of commons. And I think I have this feeling of like that it is time that, as you say, the digital infrastructure is only run by private companies. They have to go back into the public domain or into some form of commons. So like something like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is, I'm glad that it exists because I remember in the 90s when I bought my first, like Microsoft, what was it, Encarta?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, like the 4 CD ROMs with all the knowledge of it. Oh, I'm so glad that Wikipedia is there. I mean, there are so many problems with Wikipedia and all the we can debate, but still, it is glad that the Encyclopedia of the World is a common tool. Like it's a tool created by the people. And there's almost nothing else like that. There's just nothing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too that's essential for Wikipedia, with all of its problems, is transparency of getting to see how an article came to be the way it is. You can look at the editing history, and you might not know everybody who's behind a handle, but you can look and see what else they've been editing. You can look and see what they wrote exactly. You can look and see what got changed, who undid something. And it does allow anyone to go kind of evaluate for themselves the veracity of an article and try and get a sense of like, well, who's invested and what are they thinking and how are they doing? And all that kind of thing is behind closed doors with a system like Facebook. It's proprietary information we can't know. And so it's left up to people to try to understand for themselves or to try to figure out how those systems work, or academics and artists work to try to figure out how those systems work in order to investigate their effects. But yeah, some kind of, I mean, if it were me, it would be, I mean, even just opening up the source code to a system like Facebook, such that it was open source, so it could be examined. Obviously, most people aren't going to understand it, but somebody out there would take it upon themselves, or some group would take it upon themselves to start to examine it, to see, well, what does it do? And, what it's built for. I mean, this kind of goes back to we were talking about you brought up kind of libertarian points of view, kind of increasingly becoming present in Silicon Valley. And, the Zuckerberg film for me, and kind of its focus on numbers and more and growth as a theme, very much grows out of previous work of mine as an artist that's looking at the effects of visible metrics within software platforms. So the number of always showing you how many likes you have, or how many friends you have, or how many followers you have. I have a series of projects going back to 2012 that hide all of those numbers for you, called demetricators. And part of what that does, for me, this gets at that thing of how the way a piece of software is designed and how the person who designed it thinks ends up influencing those people about how they think about themselves, the users, how they think about themselves, is that we didn't used to think about exactly how many friends we have, or exactly how many people were interested in what we say, or exactly how many people laughed at our joke. But now those kinds of things are shown back to us all the time. We can't help but start to think of ourselves in these kinds of business and analytic ways of like, well, how popular was that post versus this post? And oh, if that post is really popular, maybe I should do more of that and less of this other thing. And especially for artists and someone who also teaches artists in a university, it can really influence what people make and what they don't make, perhaps more importantly. And so this is part of why I end up focusing on these questions of who makes software. And I mean, so the other piece of the trust issue, just thinking of your question, is we need a lot of different kinds of people in the mix in the development of software. We need artists, we need critical designers, we need humanists, historians, media studies people. All these people should be in the room when a big platform used by the entire planet is getting developed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is pretty much like the concept of attention economy, and those big platforms are like super attention economy, and they're all based like pretty much like on serotonin levels of like what you like. Oh, I have a couple more likes. They're all making us to like serotonin junkies, so to speak. And this is kind of like hard to overcome, because I'm on all those platforms. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Of course, I want to know what's going on, and of course I use them for my own like work as an artist or whatever. But I mean, for me, it's such an interesting example for how it's all shifting from the classic, like disciplinary society, as Foucault calls it, to the society of control, where the problem is not we have been controlled all the time, but now we enjoy being controlled. We like that people are looking at us. We like that. In the meantime, the edgy person is more likely to get the job than the person just with a tie, because the edginess is becoming its own, like currency in an attention economy. And this is just like incredibly hard. It's harder to get over than losing weight or something like that, because you constantly think that you're doing something for your own benefit. You're doing something for your resume. You're doing something, more people like you, more people enjoy your content. You can learn something, you can put it on your resume. But in the end, no, you are working for Facebook for free. You're a digital worker for Facebook, and you're unpaid and no health benefits.
And they're making just a fortune off of it too. It's not just small numbers; it's trillions when you add it all up. Yeah, that's no question. Part of my perspective on this too is that the way the system is designed, they really preference certain kinds of material. And because we end up perceiving getting more likes for something as meaning it is better, because the system tells us so. This one was liked more than this one. We internalize that as this one is better than this one. And what's kind of missing from that equation is two things. One, we have no idea who the system decided to show it to, how much attention that person actually paid to it. So we don't know what the like means, or if anybody even saw it, really, and that could account for why it wasn't liked. But also, because of our kind of the way we get taught by software to value things that get more likes over things that get less, that then starts to influence what we produce in the first place. And our next post is informed by the likes of our last posts. And so we're kind of always trending. The systems are teaching us to trend the production of content in particular ways that get the most likes. And if you look back over history, a lot of the most interesting, best ideas or most compelling experiences in art, for example, or music, weren't that well received when they first emerged on the scene. They wouldn't have gotten very many likes. And so what would have happened to them? They just get suppressed by the algorithm. If there was a Facebook in 1913, the Rite of Spring came out and everybody freaked out about it and thought it was terrible. Mm-hmm. What happens then? I mean, does it just go away? And Stravinsky goes, people didn't really like that, so maybe I'll just make this nice romantic, sonata. Instead of doing this more experimental work. It's the we have ended up in a situation with these platforms where they don't just collect data and compel data, and we're, all the things you described of we generate labor for the system and it's free labor. But we think of ourselves as businesses that need to be optimized through metric analysis. We value ourselves in that way. If we don't get likes, I mean, people post something on Instagram, it doesn't get enough likes in 10 minutes, they take it down. They think that means it's no good. They feel embarrassed by the low like count, for example. It's just really, I think, teasing out all of the ways in which it is changing how we think and what we do is a complicated endeavor, but it's deep, no question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like at the core of all of that stuff is, of course, what kind of algorithms are being used, who designs them, for what purpose. We just don't know. But I just recently learned that there is this concept of algorithmic accountability. Have you heard about that one?
Sure, yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about it? Because I just recently learned about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think of Frank Pasquale has a book out recently called Black Box Society, for example, where he, or maybe Virginia Eubanks, Automating Inequality is another good example of a couple of recent studies along this line that are looking at the fact that when you have algorithms making decisions about people's lives that we can't understand, that all kinds of bad things can come out of that. And so whether it is systems making decisions about whether or not you can get a loan, or systems making decisions about whether or not you can get general assistance or welfare, social welfare within the United States or in other countries, whatever it might be, all of these governments are just contracting out the development of these systems to private corporations, typically. And they come up with an algorithm to make these decisions, and then it's embedded in the thing. And so algorithmic accountability is a concept that argues that we need to have a public understanding of how these decisions are getting made. The idea that the state would make big decisions about individuals' lives and nobody could know anything about how that decision was made, it is crazy. And in fact, if you were to go to the welfare office of the United States and the system has decided you didn't meet some criteria and you talk to the person, because the system is making the decision, this is Virginia Eubanks' work, because the system is making the decision, the person in front of you no longer has any agency in that exchange. All they can say is, I'm sorry, the system said that you aren't eligible for this thing. Whereas before the system made the decision, it was an exchange with a human where you could actually say, well, here's an extenuating circumstance, or here's an additional piece of information that you didn't consider, or here's an error that was made in the calculation, or whatever it is. So this idea of accountability, is really a movement to try to build into systems, or to mandate within systems that there is some way for the public to understand how things work and to have input into that process.
Mm-hmm. There's this always kind of like the worst case scenario that people always talk about is the Chinese social scoring system. Yeah,
absolutely.
But I have the feeling of course it's bad and everything about it is bad, but I think that many of the mechanisms that are embedded in this obviously very blunt and very, very, very upfront system in China, many of those systems are already at work in Western software, in Western platforms, and people don't think about it and feel the wonderful freedom of the West we have.
I totally agree. Much of what people talk about in scary terms as happening in China, in the social credit system, is totally happening all over the place in the United States and the West, and more broadly. It's just that it's less understood that it's a system, and it's more broken up into a lot of different companies making those decisions, as opposed to the government kind of collecting data and then crunching and giving them back to whomever needs it. So, we're already subject to these systems making all kinds of decisions based on, I mean, even, something that came out of, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago that always kind of boggles my mind is there are companies now that build software for the police so that as you are racing to a police call, you get a threat metric about the people at that address that tells you, our calculated threat score for the people at this location is, 80 out of 100 or something, whatever it is, high threat. And these companies, their generation of that material, of that number is proprietary. They draw on whatever they can find, including social media posts, for example. So, you don't think when you're writing an angry post about something on Twitter that might then be gathered by an algorithm that's used in a police car responding to a call you've made, such that it, if you think about if you're someone who has that piece of software in the police car and you're racing to this thing and the adrenaline is going, it says this is going to be high threat.
Yeah,
you're gonna enter that situation much more on edge and like reactive than you might be if that wasn't there at all and you're trying to just take a careful evaluation of every situation you arrive at. It's predetermining how you think about the situation, and we have no idea about how those numbers are getting generated. It's just one example I'm thinking.
Yeah, but it's a good one because usually, I mean, it's kind of clear that algorithms kind of like nudge us in a certain way. But in that case, that is pretty much like an algorithm nudging around at the police officer's gun.
Absolutely.
It's a very fundamental outcome that might happen.
Yeah, especially whether you're walking in with your holster unbuttoned or your hand on your gun, or whatever. Like, it's going to affect how you think and how you kind of react to whatever happens in front of you. So it's a concrete example for sure.
Yeah. I mean, just like, for example, self-driving cars. I'm kind of a fan of self-driving cars. I'm looking forward to being able to drive in a self-driving car because I trust a self-driving car way more than my own driving skills. So that's kind of okay. So there is some level of trust I have in those systems. Still, I mean, there is no way for me probably understanding how they make their ethical decisions of like the whole thing, like the trolley problem, like
right.
Who gets killed and who not, in what decision process. So what is your perspective on that? So when do we actually really get that stuff really on the street in everyday life? Do you give that
self-driving cars?
Self-driving cars. Do you give it like 10 years or 5 or what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, we have some doing it now in certain capacities with Tesla and highway driving and even street driving. I think the complication is going to be the long, if not endless, hybrid mix of self-driving cars and human-driven cars. And computational systems really want to think about the world in computable ways, meaning they need things to fit into something they already understand as well as possible. This is this thing on a pole with 3 lights that fits my model of a traffic light, and so I know what that is, and I know how to pay attention to it. These markings on the street, I know how those are supposed to be, and so I know how to follow that. And so it fits my computational understanding of what a street marking looks like, and I know how to navigate it. But as soon as something enters the system that wasn't predetermined and isn't part of that already computed or computable kind of way of thinking, is when the system gets confused or potentially confused. And I think the more that streets are this weird hybrid mix of what they are, which is a chaotic environment, the longer there's going to be complication about automating everything that happens within those spaces. So I think there's going to be a push increasingly as self-driving cars become more popular and people desire them for various reasons. There's going to be a push to increasingly turn the streets into fully,
Mm.
automated spaces. Like, are there going to be self-driving only streets or self-driving only lanes? Like we have kind of carpool lanes and things like that in the United States. I don't know, but as long as we have humans driving cars, then I think it's going to be a strange space that's hard to push fully. I don't know. I mean, it's not something I've given a ton of thought to because I don't have one. I haven't really been in one yet.
Yeah.
But just in terms of like how those decisions get made and who's making them and what the outcomes are, there's a way in which, like the things you hear about, right? It's like, well, humans are a lot more chaotic and a lot more likely maybe to get you in an accident or run into you than a self-driving car is. Like I think that's something people think about. It's like, well, who's going to be responsible and
of course, like whose insurance risk is it, and all that stuff. Absolutely. I mean, there is always the argument that at some point it's kind of like the big data argument, because if you have two self-driving cars and they are connected to each other or they're talking to each other, even if the self-driving car coming from one side looks right into the sun and can't really see anything, the car from the other side will send it the data and say, like, see, you have a second angle now, you can make a better decision. So I guess the very moment all those cars are interfacing in some way, it's probably getting more and more safe. But still, this is just like, I mean, if I think back at my childhood, even like when I was a teenager, I mean, there are two things that I would never have expected that they would probably happen in my lifetime. And the first is, of course, self-driving cars, because, like Knight Rider and all that stuff, that was just like pure fantasy for me growing up. And the second thing is like voice recognition. I never expected voice recognition to really work. And I'm not really saying it already works, but I mean, this is pretty pretty interesting stuff happening. Still, it's but also from my perspective from then, my vision was always there, those people at universities working at all of that stuff. I would also never have expected that it will be this RoboCop future where like the big corporations, like OCP and RoboCop, will kind of like run the planet, and they will own the police. They don't really own the police in the present day, but they have algorithms that they feed to the police and stuff like that. So it's a very bizarre environment we grew up to see.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about algorithm, the police are using private proprietary algorithms to tell them about how threatening a situation, to predict how threatening the situation they're on their way to is going to be. If we add in there that pretty soon the car will also be driving them to the place that they're going, and that's not developed by the public or the police. Yeah. I mean, I guess I remain cautious, and I think this is the thing that we need to do is generally as a society is to be way more cautious about the development of large-scale platforms that have significant effects on human experience. Because, I mean, Facebook is a great example where it's, it was weaponized to influence voters in the United States in 2016. It's happening again right now. It's like once all of our eggs are in one basket, so to speak, 3 billion people on one platform, it becomes the absolute most attractive vector for manipulation and negative influence. And it's easy to think about self-driving cars as like, well, it's just facilitating transportation. Like, it's not the same thing. It's not communication. But what happens when the social credit score combines with self-driving cars such that now cars won't take you certain places because you haven't earned the right score? Just as an example. And the only way to get anywhere is in a self-driving car that's controlled by the system. So all of a sudden now your movements are limited in ways that, right now you have more agency as long as you can meet the criteria for the states to give you a driver's license, and you can obtain a car for some amount of time, borrow or buy or whatever. you can take yourself places within the boundaries of wherever you're allowed to go. And I think self-driving cars would potentially set up a new opportunity for control and limitation. So, we need to be cautious and think about how these systems get made and who has control over them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like self-driving cars, there is also the whole dimension of like the very moment you're sitting in a self-driving car, you're like literally a captive audience. You are sitting in a car, probably hours and hours, nothing to do. Of course, you will consume media. Yes. So this is just like the perfect environment to be getting on more networks, on more social feeds, etc., etc. So, oh my God,
we need more labor, free labor, as you were talking.
More free labor, absolutely.
I mean, the way I always think about this is, anytime something new gets built, we need to think about who benefits from that new thing. And to whose benefit is it? Is it really to your benefit, or is it to someone else's benefit, the platform's benefit, the corporation's benefit, the system's benefit? And of course, it could be some mix of both. But like, what's the relative balance, and who is this for? Really
but if it's a profit-oriented company, it's the profit of the company. There is like, nobody can really be mad at Zuckerberg doing anything not given that. I mean, of course, like 3 billion people use it. That's a different scale, so to speak. But I mean, he's a businessman. He has a profit-oriented company. But the moment, as you said in the beginning, the very moment that tool becomes kind of like infrastructure, vital infrastructure for democracies, then we're speaking of a different problem. Just recently, a couple of days ago, I heard that there is this quarrel going on between Facebook, based in Ireland, the European Facebook, and the European Union, and Facebook was actively threatening to withdraw from the European market if the European Union don't do what they want. I mean, like, there's one part of my brain saying, like, of course they're not doing that because they're losing a giant market. But at the same time, they have a lot of leverage. They have just like a giant wedge in the door. I mean, Jesus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So much leverage. I don't think they would ever do it, because the goal is not to have less users. It's always to have more users.
Yeah.
That's part of what that film talks about. So, but they have the ability to freak a lot of individuals out in the European Union, that they're going to lose access to all of this connection that now is the primary means of connection, especially in the pandemic era, where so much more of our interactions are online through these platforms. So Facebook has all kinds of leverage to push against various policies, and they have so much, as all of big tech does, they have so much capacity to easily withstand so much what seem like high assessments of penalties and things like that too. $5 billion, GDPR kind of violation, whatever. It's like it's like 3 days of ads or something. I mean, it's really not a big deal. There was this huge ad boycott of Facebook this summer, 1,200 major companies in a massive ad boycott and around race issues in the United States, and the way that Facebook has animated racist activities. And Zuckerberg's reaction at the time was, we'll see what the metrics say. Right? Like, I don't think, if the metrics tell us this is really a big deal, we'll deal with it. But otherwise, we're not going to deal with it.
Yeah, but
sure enough, profit went up.
It's such a perfect capitalist answer because, I mean, of course he could say, like, we should do the right thing, and and just like adjust our stuff according to, but no, the metrics, like, we'll believe them, because there's more. There's like good old Marx, money has to make more money. That's the basic rule set. Yeah.
That's right. Need more, no matter what.
Absolutely. Oh my. Well, I mean, like, we have like 5 or 6 minutes left. It's like not that much more time. But I don't even know where to start, because we opened the can of worms again. But Okay, one thing I was thinking about a couple of days ago is that one of the big problems that Facebook still has, and I was confronted with that a couple of days ago because I was banned on Facebook for 3 days because I posted a joke, and I don't know if someone told them that I was offensive or something. I don't even know. But I was blocked for 3 days. There was no way for me to explain what I meant or something because they just don't have enough people to deal with that stuff. So my question would be, there has to be already to be some research about algorithmic content moderation. At some point, there will be algorithms that moderate content because it's just like way cheaper than hiring people in Indonesia to do content moderation. So have you heard anything about that? Is there research going on?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say there's research in two directions. There's research into algorithmic content moderation for sure. There's also been a lot of looking at the negative effects of content moderation on humans who are currently doing most of the hardest work in that area.
Yeah, that's really that's kind of like the horror sweatshop where you see all the worst that humanity can offer, Absolutely. And those poor people have to delete it. Oh my God!
Absolutely, but but the automated content moderation is such an important topic. In everything from the way that media platforms such as YouTube have automated decision-making about whether or not something is violating fair use law, always to the benefit of the corporation, always in a way that makes it very difficult for the individual to combat if the algorithm makes a decision about them. You just have to try something different, right? Even if you are not violating the law, literally. It doesn't really matter if the algorithm decides you are. I had my own experience of getting kicked off Facebook a few months ago. There was kind of a warning where it kind of like asked me to go through a weird verification process a few weeks earlier. It's like, we're not sure we know who you are, and could you give us like more information and tell us more about yourself? And it was really this moment where I found myself, even as someone who, as an artist, is critical, constantly thinking critically about how these companies animate and activate and control us. My first response was, I have to do whatever it is they want, right? Because I was out, I was going to lose access to this network that I've built over time. And so I did it, and it was all fine. I was like, okay. And then, like, I don't know, 2 weeks later, I went to log on to Facebook and it just said, sorry, you no longer have any access to Facebook. We've determined you, I don't remember exactly what it said, we've determined you violated community standards or something.
Yeah, like it's always community standards. Yeah.
And it said you can appeal this decision, but because of COVID-19, we may not have the personnel available to evaluate your case. And see you later. And that was it. And it was like, I don't know what I did. I don't know. I mean, I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even really posted anything on Facebook in a few days at this particular moment. So it wasn't something I'd done. And I started looking on the web and found there were all kinds of people having this issue. Like, it was a rampant kind of thing happening to a lot of people and causing a lot of stress all over the place. And I was so freaked out. And I think, that's a big piece of this puzzle, that it really has significant effects on people's lives if all of a sudden you cut off their means of communicating with everyone else. And so I happen, because of my work, I at least know a few people who kind of work in the depths of Facebook, because they've reached out to me, or people I've known who've ended up there in some way or another. And so I was able to reach out to a couple people and say, hey, can you help with this? And somebody internally put in a service, like a ticket essentially, to try and get the case looked at. And I did end up getting back on about 36 hours later. But yeah, there's, the research is really kind of fits with our earlier discussions of transparency and accountability, that, if a system is making decisions about what kind of content is okay and what kind of content isn't okay, it's making speech decisions. It's moderating speech. Yeah. And this is definitely Zuckerberg as recently as, I mean, it came out in an article just a couple weeks ago on The Verge, all these kind of internal Q&As he did at the company this summer, that he continues to believe that somehow a platform like Facebook can be neutral. And his goal is to make it neutral in order to absolve the company and himself of all of the kinds of things that happen there, you know. But no platform is neutral. No piece of software can be neutral. It's impossible. It always has a point of view. It always thinks of the world in a certain way, and it inflects that way of thinking on everyone who uses it. So the idea that it could be neutral and making that your goal is a flawed ideology. I would, you know, it's not my term, but I would refer to it as neutralism.
Yeah.
You know, and like, we need people, if we're going to have individuals in charge of 3 billion individuals' infrastructure for communication, they need to be better informed about what happens with the design of anything and how it influences other humans, than to think that it could be a neutral thing. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
And so I think I might have gotten a little off from your question about kind of research around content moderation, but certainly people, I mean, from my perspective, this is where people are looking at it, is that whoever designs the moderation algorithm is in heavy control. And, you know, Zuckerberg himself, I remember when he spoke in front of Congress in 2018 after the Cambridge Analytica stuff really went crazy, one of the things he talked about is, we're hiring 20,000 new people to do content moderation, but we're going to get AI on it and it's going to work eventually. Like, it's not really working yet. And AI is right now with deep learning is all about pattern detection. It's all about, does this thing kind of fit the pattern of other things I've derived from the data previously? And speech is just a really complicated thing, you know, especially when creative, you know, content, artistic content gets in the mix there. It can really be a complicated thing to tease out. What is, I mean, we deal with this all the time as a society. You know, what does this mean? It's, I mean, we all have different interpretations of what
I'm just trying to, I'm just like, it would be impossible. I mean, like, impossible, maybe I'm knocking on wood, like, but I mean, just like posting a meme, like, you would have as a system so much knowledge of the world to even decipher a single meme that this is just like, it's blowing my mind. That might be possible at some time, but I don't know.
I mean, we'll see. They will get better over time, unquestionably, but from my perspective, it's always important to remember that these algorithms think about the world as they have seen it before, which means that a new thing, if it doesn't fit those patterns, which is what creative people are always trying to do, is come up with a thing that doesn't fit previous patterns, or that modifies or adapts from a previous pattern to talk about it in a critical way, or a creative way, or a humorous way, or whatever it might be. That's a moment where it's the system is faced with, well, does this fit or not fit? And it's harder for them to know if they haven't seen it before. And so it's I mean, at least with machine learning as the paradigm, it's a complicated problem that I think reinforces keeping things as they are and seeing things as they have been, rather than trying to evaluate the world anew and to promote the creation of different things we haven't seen before.
Yep. Well, last question for you. Then I let you go to your afternoon. So it's a very personal question, because I like to ask it to people who deal with technology, software, stuff like that. So, what is your favorite story of a complete technological fuck up? When something completely went wrong. It can be, you know, like in startup culture or e-governance, wherever, like, just like one of your favorite technological fuck ups.
You mean like in my personal life versus, or you mean
could be in your personal life, but also could be something that happened to a company or something like that. If I'm putting you on the spot, then
yeah, you're putting. I wish you'd sent me. I would have really given it some thought. I think the moments. I mean, for me, it's a collection of moments as opposed to a very singular moment. I have a massive screenshot archive. I'm constantly screenshotting things I see on my screen, and a lot of what I capture are all of these moments when the software gives us a message that is just kind of funny or absurd or reveals that it didn't. That nobody thought to code a way that would appropriately react to the situation. So the system telling us, just even like down messages and things like that, and just kind of the absurdity of something went wrong is kind of like the classic, like Facebook was down a few days ago here in the United States, at least. And it was just simply a something went wrong message. Please check back shortly kind of thing. And okay. I love seeing a moment where like $1 trillion corporation with the most capacity to handle anything, both in terms of financial resources and computational resources, human resources, geographic resources, all these things, just is a blank screen with a sentence on it, and that's all there is.
Yeah.
So I think it's those moments where there's just utter and complete failure by platforms that have so much capacity, and it reminds me, at least, that these, as stable as we think these things are, they really can, on the drop of a hat, fall apart. And whether or not they can, we always presume they're just going to come right back. Somebody will fix the problem, they'll find the error, and it'll all be good again. But I would argue that at least with democracy in the United States, I think we're finding that the system isn't necessarily coming back as we hoped it would in response to a bunch of errors, and the implications of that fragility and the actual existence of how fragile that is has pretty significant consequences for the planet.
What a great uplifting ending for our talk.
I'm not necessarily the best optimist in the world. It's true, but
no, but I completely agree to you. I'm a good old leftist. So I'm always frustrated of there's just like I every day I have how the fuck is this possible moment every day, at least one, and I think I will have one until I die, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, from my perspective, if we wanted to leave it on an optimistic note, it's that we have more agency as users and individuals in these systems than we think we do. And it's part of what I try to focus on with a lot of my art, is helping people to see that they have agency. The fact that a platform like Facebook says, please tell us if you're feeling happy or sad or wow or angry, doesn't mean you have to accurately react to that. Just because it says, how are you feeling today? Or what did you do today? Or tell us something interesting, about your work or whatever it is, doesn't mean you have to do what a piece of software asks of you. You can be experimental with these systems. You
can be creative with it. Yes, it's absolutely. Creativity is the answer sometimes to understand stuff.
I think it is right now, given that individuals don't have control over the system. All we have control over is what we give or don't give to the systems. And so that's a place for experimentation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben. It was a pleasure chatting with you.